and welcome to Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents, a conversation with Elizabeth Bunce. Elizabeth Bunce grew up on a steady diet of Sherlock Holmes, Trixie Belden, and Quincy M.E., and always played the lead prosecutor in mock trials. She has never had a governess, and no one has ever accused her of being irrepressible, although a teacher did once accuse her of being argumentative, which is entirely untrue, and she can prove it. She lives in Kansas City with her husband and their cats. She is the multiple award-winning author of many books, including a standalone novel, A Curse Dark as Gold, 2 books in the Thief Errant series, Star-Crossed and Liar's Moon, and 5 books in what we're going to be focusing on today, the Myrtle Hardcastle series, set in 1890s Victorian England in the town of Swinburne. And the story, which is, if I remember correctly, is for a middle grade students, but I enjoyed them as well, involves a 12-year-old investigator, Myrtle Hardcastle, and her family, and the mysteries that they encounter along the way. So, Elizabeth, I want to thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for Harley, our little sidekick here today, banging the computer monitor and shaking that, making it seem like Kansas had an earthquake.
Okay. Well, if it bangs again, we'll know why.
Yeah, I am so happy to be here with Harley. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess we can get started with an easy one because, as I understand, Premeditated Myrtle, you got the title for this in a very unusual way. And does that really help launch the series for you?
It did. Well, yeah. It did. The title alone didn't, but I can start with how that title came to be. So we have had a big animal family for most of my husband and my marriage, and CJ is, I'm sorry, I now have a cat hair in my microphone, so I apologize.
Okay, well, go ahead and take it out. We'll go ahead. I can talk a little bit over it.
I'm going to start over. Okay, so the title, Premeditated Myrtle, it was one of those great unexpected gifts from the universe for us. My husband is an attorney and has always had to get up and go to work at, attorney's hours, which do not suit night owl me at all. But at the time, we also had a large animal family of several dogs who thought we should get up early and feed them breakfast. And so one morning, we were all kind of stumbling groggily through the morning and attempting to carry on a cogent conversation about some current event on the news. And I tried to say something about premeditated murder, and it came out Premeditated Myrtle. And I looked at CJ and I said, that is a middle grade mystery. And it sat on the back burner for several years, and every once in a while I would take it out and I'd think, I'm going to write a contemporary story about a girl in suburbia solving mysteries in her neighborhood. And it just never sparked off in my mind where to go with that. And then a few years later, this other character walked into our lives, and my husband went to take out the trash and never came back one stormy summer night. And he's back now. He wasn't gone forever, but he was gone long enough that I had to go out and check on him. And I found him standing in a pool of rainy lamplight from the garage lamp, talking to a distressed tiny neighbor who was standing there pouring her miserable heart out to him about her plight. And just saying, excuse me, sir, it's raining and it's hot out and I have nowhere to go and can you help me? And it was this little black and white cat who was just meowing so insistently. And we got to know her over the next several months, and she kept coming around, and it got to the point where she became kind of a fixture in our family. And I jokingly referred to her as my husband's new girlfriend because she adored him and they formed this fast bond. And he would come home from work and he'd be looking for her, and she'd come over and she'd be looking for him. And if I came out walking one of the dogs, she would get this look like, "Ugh, it's you." And just so disgusted with me. And so I was joking with a friend about the situation, and she said, "You still write mysteries, right? And you should write one about the cat." Because she said either cat people love mysteries or mystery people love cats. And I can't remember which one, but it didn't matter because it was a splendid idea. And I was kind of in between projects at the time, and I had done what a lot of professional women do, and I had had to take some time off from my career to take care of some family issues, and I wasn't really sure what I was wanting to write about. And so in the summer that we met that cat, I thought, she would be a great addition to that middle grade mystery. So the cat and the girl, and somehow my brain put together the cat and the girl and went Victorian. And as soon as I had that setting, as soon as I knew it was set in the Victorian era, it took off. So Myrtle and Peony, the cat, and the whole village of murderous suspects just launched from those two little moments. And
yeah,
here we are today, 5 books later, and a spin-off series coming.
Well, we'll get into that later, but for now we'll go into this. I assume is that the cat that's on the dedication
That
page?
is the cat. That is the cat. And it's funny because you might notice that there's not just one portrait of Peony in every book. We've got this happens to be book 4 in Myrtle Peril. We have this portrait of Peony. Peony also appears on every cover of every book. So Myrtle, our human sleuth, gets one picture per book. But Peony, as is clearly her due, as any cat person knows, gets 3, which is only the bare minimum of respect due to the true heroine of the series, Peony the cat.
Absolutely, and she even has lines, even though they're all variations on no or
no. Well, yes, because Sophie, the real life Peony, when she meowed, really sounded like she was saying no. And she was so full of this robust, extraordinary personality. And we had always been dog people. And if you see book 5 features our large family of hound dogs. And those were the dogs that we had that sparked the early morning grogginess. And so Sophie Peony was our first experience with cats, and she was such a different entity that enchanted everyone in our family, from the humans to the dogs, and we just thought she was everything.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to get into the household as well, so we get an idea of who these people are, because we have Myrtle, obviously, the 12-year-old budding investigator, the kind who speaks her mind. There's also her governess, Ada Judson, her father, who is also a lawyer, Swinburne's prosecutor, Molly, their cook, and I have Mr. Blakeney, who was a family friend and law clerk, at least by the 5th book. He's just basically the nice guy. He can also provide legal help and befriending Myrtle as well. Does that cover everybody? Did I miss anybody?
So Myrtle, Miss Judson, Peony, Cook, and Mr. Blakeney. I think those are the major players. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are our recurring cast.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the father's name though. Who?
Arthur.
Arthur, of course. Yes, and as a matter of fact, you have some interesting. I love the fact that you have epigrams at the beginnings of each chapter, including apparently books that he wrote. Foundations of Legal Medicine, or is that by somebody else? Principles in Detection.
Oh, disappointed, Bill.
Oh,
Disappointed.
sorry. What did I do wrong?
H.M. Hardcastle.
HM, not Arthur.
H.M.
Okay.
Hardcastle.
Uh,
So you will
but it's
remember that Myrtle is named for her disagreeable great aunt Helena,
oh,
and that Myrtle
Eleanor.
is her middle name,
Mm-hmm.
and the H.M. Hardcastle, who is writing those volumes of great erudite criminology scholarship, is our young criminologist, Myrtle. Helena
Oh,
Myrtle Hardcastle. Yes.
interesting. Okay. Well, that's perfectly fine. Thank you for correcting me because
No,
that's what
that's
you're here
okay.
for. I
But and here's the thing. It's um the way that I write, I want my readers of any age to come to the books wherever they are and enjoy them on whatever level they engage at the moment. I hope that I've written books that are rereadable, something that a kid might read when they're 9 or 10 and come back again when they're 16 and come back again when they're 50 and see nuances that they didn't necessarily pick up on the first time. Because we want the experience to be as rich as possible. And for me as a writer, for me as a reader, it's not as rewarding if you just get it all the first time. Those little moments where you revisit it and you're like, wait, I don't remember that the 15th time I saw it, but time 16 it clicks. So that's actually, it makes it more fun for me as a writer. And as a writer, of course, we're all readers first, and that's, we write the things that we would really love to be reading.
yeah.
So, and part of the joy of the Myrtle books is, and part of the reason that I wrote them, I had the early books in my career were young adult fantasies for older teens, and my writing was trending darker and steamier and more violent, but I was getting all of my fan mail from 5th and 6th graders. And I thought, I need to write something for those kids, for that age group. Those kids are finding my books, and something about my writing is really resonating with them. And if that's the historical settings, the denser prose, the darker themes, if I'm writing for those kids who were sending me fan mail, I don't want to change anything about what they already love in my work. And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to maintain everything that they were responding to, but give them a heroine that was and plot lines that were more age appropriate. So more
Mm-hmm.
age appropriate murder, more middle grade friendly murders. And I will say that had I not had that title fall so fortuitously into my lap, Premeditated Myrtle, I maybe wouldn't have focused on murder mysteries, but maybe I would have, because those were the kind of stories I responded to as a girl Myrtle's age. I was around 12 when my dad introduced me to the show Quincy M.E., which is the forerunner to, now this is really going to date me, to CSI and Prime Suspect and all of the great forensic science Bones mystery TV series that we have now. And earlier this century. Uh, but I was so captivated by the idea in Quincy. So Quincy is a medical examiner for the city of Los Angeles, and it's from the 76 to 81 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was so just spellbound by the idea that the dead could speak to us and could tell us these incredibly fascinating details of the last moments of life. And that fascination has stayed with me for my entire life. It led me to study anthropology in college and even consider a path of forensic anthropology as a career. But my boyfriend at the time, husband now, CJ, said, "Do you really want to spend all your days thinking about murder, to be forensic anthropology?" And I was like, okay, well, that's a fair point. So instead, I became an author where I spend all of my days thinking about murder.
And you come back to it somewhat naturally, because I noticed from a very early interview when your editor for your fantasy series said, described them as mysteries disguised in fantasy dress.
Yeah, so that was fascinating because I had always considered, always from the moment I thought of myself as a writer, which was somewhere around, 7th or 8th grade. I always loved fantasy, wanted to write fantasy, thought of myself as a fantasy writer, immersed myself in fantasy storytelling, loved fairy tales, loved the works of I'm drawing a complete blank on my favorite Robin McKinley, and I'm thinking of the series Joel Silverberg, and all of those great classics.
Mine was a lot older. It was Robert Howard and Michael Moorcock and Tanith Lee. Basically.
Tanith Lee is, oh my gosh, what a absolute luminary in the field. She wrote one of the best, some of the best fairy tale retellings that we have. But so I had always thought of myself as a fantasy writer, but I was also very much raised on Sherlock Holmes and Masterpiece Mystery, which was just called Mystery back in those days, and Law and Order. I mentioned that my husband is an attorney, and so we watched. I have a level of Law and Order fandom that I think is unmatched in the the fandom universe. Of like, I should really write Law and Order fan fiction. I could maybe make that a whole thing. Maybe I should look into that. But I mean, I know like encyclopedic facts about character names and episode names that I'll just rattle something off, and CJ will be like, no one else knows that, right? I'm like, everybody knows that. And he's like, no,
there are a lot of fans.
It's just you. So no, and I think that's in large part because when I was growing up, when I was coming up as a storyteller, we didn't have a lot of really amazing fantasy TV. The stuff there was no Game of Thrones. There was no Xena. There was no amazing Lord of the Rings trilogy. We didn't have that. We had Lady Hawk, and that was it. and we had to, so while I was filling my well with fantasy novels, I was also simultaneously filling my well with a lot of mystery TV. And so I internalized the fantasy landscape, but the mystery plot structure.
Yeah.
And so when I started writing, that was just sort of where I naturally fell into these plot lines. And my editor, when we got to our third book together, Liar's Moon, which is the second Digger novel, and it's this one right here.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is a genuine murder mystery. Digger is solved. My fantasy thief, Digger, is tasked to help a friend solve his wife's murder. Excuse me. But when we were writing that, Cheryl Klein, my editor, looked at that and she at the manuscript and she said, "Okay, you're a mystery writer. Your books all have fantasy settings and fantasy tropes and fantasy elements like magic and ghosts and paranormal things happening, but your plot lines are firmly mystery plot lines. Who done it? It's hidden artifacts, searches for uncovering secrets, and I just thought that was a fascinating way of looking at my work that I had never considered. And I actually never meant to consider it much more than that until the title Premeditated Myrtle popped into my head. And I thought, okay, well, let's just embrace this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew from the moment of first writing Myrtle's voice and first writing her stories that she was going to be grounded very, very firmly in the 19th century scientific tradition. And so that wasn't going to leave a lot of room for paranormal elements for her. So she started out very grounded in real world science.
Yeah, definitely on the Sherlock Holmes side. No ghosts need apply.
Oh yes.
Although
yet. Yep. But so when I sent the first manuscript to my agent, I said, what do you want to know about this? Because I hadn't even really told her I was working on it. And I'd been working on another book, and then I had my little break for family care, and then I got back to work wrote Myrtle. And I said, so what do you want to know about this book? And she said, nothing, just send it. And so I sent it. And about 10 seconds later, I was like, okay, but just so you know, it's not a fantasy. There are no supernatural elements. There's nothing paranormal. So don't be looking for a ghost because it's not there. But what I discovered, to my absolute delight, was that the research involved and the world building involved in writing Victorian mysteries was every bit as rewarding as the creation of fantasy worlds and fantasy landscapes and fantasy world building. And so it ultimately never ended up feeling all that different to me from the writing perspective. But I did start to get a little itchy around the middle of book 3. And around the middle of book 3 is when I started pondering what might be going on with book 5. And I kept thinking, I would really like a ghost somehow, but I don't know how we're ever going to work that in, until I remembered how scientific the Victorians were about everything, including the paranormal.
That's right. It's the great era of spiritualism. And of course, Conan Doyle was kind of in the lead of it. He was always interested in it. That's one of the weird things I picked up from my research, is that he, when he was a doctor, before writing the Sherlock Holmes, he was a member of if I remember, the Psychical Research Society. I can't remember.
Yeah, so it's
name.
So he's we can find out what the name is, because it comes up in book 5.
That's right.
It is the Association for Psychical Research, I think is what it's called, but we will see what it says.
Yeah, so it was the great era for that, and the great era for
it's fraud. The Society for Psychical Research, which is still a live organization, and their website is spr.ac.uk for anyone who wants to look that up. But Yeah, so actually, when he stopped writing, drawing this back to a more sensible starting place. In book 3, takes place in Cold-Blooded Myrtle, which is my classic Christmas mystery, takes place in December of 1893, which is the same date as the publication of The Adventure at Reichenbach Falls, which is the last Sherlock Holmes story. The fateful Sherlock Holmes story where Doyle invented this ridiculous villain character who came out of nowhere, supervillain for the entire point to kill off Sherlock Holmes off stage in the most ignominious manner possible and devastating thousands of fans worldwide, including some close acquaintances of Myrtle. And after that, he went into his great phase of psychic research, which comes up again in the lovely way that things roll back around in book 5. So when we wrote Myrtle Means an Opportunity, I pitched this one as Scooby-Doo meets And Then There Were None. Myrtle and company are on an isolated Scottish island where there is a Scooby-Doo, genuine Scooby-Doo style mystery with ghosts and various machinations, and Myrtle has to uncover a haunting that is occurring in this castle.
As a matter of fact, I'm only this far into the book right now. And of course, I'm going to finish this afterwards. And Miss Judson, it turns out, because she's half Scottish, inherits the title and land of this laird up there. And I'm just literally now, she's in the castle, in the family home, the mansion, however you call
Rockford
it.
Hall.
Yes, Rockford. Is that from the Rockford Files, or is that?
Yes. Oh yeah.
And it's still appropriate. You even spelled it correctly, like a Scottish person would do.
Yes, with 2 F's.
Yes, yeah. And this is your now. Actually, I want to get back to the research point, because I understand from your Thief Errant series, you mentioned researching lunar science and espionage tools, period firearms, to form the background for your fantasy. And there's also, you did the same thing with Myrtle as well, only for Victorian, because I come across, we talked about the Marie Celeste case, the Tichborne claimant, the state of forensics back then, because you have a doctor, if I remember correctly, who's doing autopsies.
Yes.
As well, so you're up on that.
Oh yes, Dr. Minjal, the police surgeon. Yes.
Right. So how different was it? I mean, as far as was it the depth is just the same? It's just you're researching different subjects for your Victorian series?
Yes, and so that's how I start, because I am a lifelong nerd. And as we were talking before we began recording, I will learn anything. So this is a fine time to mention that every book is autobiographical in some ways, but people have asked me where I got Myrtle's voice, and I'm like, well, or how hard was it to write a middle grade voice? And I'm like, yeah, not at all, because Myrtle is me when I was in junior high, and my homeroom teacher told my parents I was argumentative and antisocial. And she is the great nerdy child that I was, just fascinated with learning anything and everything she can, and just so curious about the world. And I have never lost that love of learning. And it's one of my favorite parts of being a fiction writer, and it would probably be like that if I wrote nonfiction too, is the research, the learning, the fact that every new book is like a new semester of college, that I get to take a deep dive into the most disparate subjects imaginable and learn all kinds of strange things that I didn't know that I needed to know until I needed to write a book about them. And it's just that research sparks the plot lines in so many ways that I can barely even come up with a list right now of the things that I found when I was researching that then built the mysteries that I developed from the story. But I can give you one example, one fantastic example from my first book. So my fairy tale retelling, A Curse Dark as Gold, is a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, which is a lot of people, young readers, most of your audience watching this or listening to it will probably know the story of Rumpelstiltskin. It's the miller's daughter. Her father tells the king that he has a daughter who is so clever that she can spin straw into gold. And the king's like, well, I got to get me some of that. And so he hauls her off to the castle and sets her up in a room full of straw and says, do this by tomorrow morning or I'll kill you. And she, of course, has no idea how to spin straw into gold. And so she's sitting there crying, and this strange little figure, folkloric, impish creature, shows up and says, well, I know how to spin straw into gold, and how can I help? And so I wrote a retelling of that set in a woolen mill. Now, I am getting to the research point. I promise. The miller in fairy tales, in European folklore and fairy tales, is a sort of a personification of greed and boastfulness. And so the mill doesn't actually play any role at all in the story of Rumpelstiltskin. But the spinning element occurs in many variants of the Rumpelstiltskin motif, or the name of the helper motif, where young women get in this fix and have to be helped out of it by someone who can do their spinning for them. And I am a lifelong needlewoman, and so I thought it would be interesting to set this, and interesting and resonant to set this in a woolen mill. And one of the fascinating elements of the Rumpelstiltskin story or the motif, which is known as a name of the helper story, because the helper is anonymous and we don't know the name of the person that comes to do the spinning. And finding out that character's true name is the sort of the point of the story. And if your fairy tale is only a page and a half long, it works fine for that character not to have a name. When it's a character in a 400-page novel, it's a little harder. You need something to call that person. And so I was fortunately north of Kansas City. There is an 1840s woolen mill that's still in operation. I mean, it's not still in operation. It's in operation as a living history museum. They have a flock of sheep. They have the period spinning machines and the apparatus, and you can tour the mill and you can walk through the halls and you can listen to the thump of the gears and look at the machines and smell the scent of old lanolin that is still 150 years later, 180 years later in the wood and everything. And it's really evocative and amazing. And so on my very first research trip to Watkins Woolen Mill for my Rumpelstiltskin retelling, I had barely even started the story, but I knew that I needed to know what a mill felt like and operated like and looked like. And I was, so fortunate that there was one right in my own backyard. And we are taking the tour upstairs in this hot attic of this mill floor, and it's this massive room. So think like size of a gymnasium, and it's dusty, and it's this ancient machine, and the costumed tour guide is demonstrating this machine. And she said, this is the spinning machine, and it's called a spinning jack. And the spinning jack is every kid who has ever taken fifth grade history knows that the Industrial Revolution began with the spinning jenny, a machine that mechanized spinning from one little skein of thread on a spinning wheel at a time to multiple skeins of thread on the spinning jenny. Well, this is the grandson of the spinning jenny, the spinning jack, which is a room-sized machine. So they're demonstrating the spinning jack, and it's this big, massive frame that comes. Sorry, I've tangled myself up in my cord here in my enthusiasm for this story.
We can get you out of it.
Yeah.
Please carry on.
It's a tangled thread here of this tale of the spinning. The spinning frame comes out. The costumed interpreter is doing the thing and demonstrating it. She says, "This machine is called the spinning jack, and the men who operated them were known as jack spinners." And it, even 20 years later, I'm getting goosebumps from the moment, because I was standing there and she said that, and it was like the heavens opened up and the choir of angels went, "Ah!" And I had the name of my character, Jack Spinner. And that is the kind of amazing, resonant, luscious, visceral detail that only comes out with research. And I don't know that had I not gone to that particular mill with that particular era of machine, I would not have learned that element that became such a crucial backbone for a novel that ended up being so thick and delicious, and getting ready to celebrate its 20th anniversary. So
yeah, and that's what makes really good writing work, is being able to take all those skeins and putting it together in some kind of almost mystical alchemical concoction.
Alchemy, indeed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know how it works, but I'm here for it. And I will read as many thick books about 18th century wool economy as it takes to get the one little perfect moment. And what made Myrtle so especially fun for me as a writer was how immediately she made it clear that she was just as into those little nerdy facts as I was, and that she wasn't going to let them go. As historical fiction writers, so many amazing things, so many fun, fascinating things that we learn never make it to print because you just can't figure out a way to make them pertinent to the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm sure there are thrilling things that I learned about the 18th century English woolen industry that are now lost forever because they couldn't fit in A Curse Darkest Gold. But Myrtle just decided she was going to drop them in as footnotes, and which absolutely delighted me, because we've all either been or known the kid that is so excited to tell you the cool thing that they learned at school today, or the cool thing that they learned watching Mysteries at the Museum, or, and I just thought, this is delightful. Let's just lean into Myrtle's nerdiness and her enthusiasm for learning, and it's been so much fun.
Well, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to interrupt here just to show just how deep you go into, because there's a particular section in Premeditated Myrtle in which she has to write lines in Greek as a punishment. And look what she did. Look at that. She puts the Greek in and doesn't translate it. How dare you? I love footnotes too. Absolutely. publish annotated editions of Agatha Christie novels. So, that's why I do that.
That's why I do this. Yes, yes. It's just so much fun. So I have a fun story about that particular footnote.
Yeah.
I don't speak Greek. I don't write Greek. So I did my best with the tools that I had available for Greek, but I managed to get the line in modern Greek, which is not the kind of Greek that Myrtle would speak. And my agent, in her enthusiasm for the manuscript, shared it with a non-writing friend. She's like, and that non-writing friend came back with, so you should know that this isn't right. This Greek isn't right. This is modern Greek, not classical Greek, and the classical Greek that Myrtle would be using would not have the particular word that she needed for the writing of lines. And the line that Myrtle has to write comes from another incident in an earlier chapter where her governess accuses her of being hysterical and ridiculous. And Myrtle's response, of course, is, I am not! I am never hysterical!
As a 12-year-old girl would say.
Yes. Of course, the word hysterical is a Greek or modern as in the Victorian era, Greek back formation.
Mm-hmm.
And it did not exist as a term in ancient Greece or in classical Greek. And so I had to figure out a way to translate that into a form that Myrtle could write. And was I going to give that line up? No, of course I was not going to give that line up. So I contacted a professor of classics at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas, and I asked her if she would give me a little help with my translation here. And I said, here's the situation. I'm a children's author. I know this isn't correct. I know we don't have a word for hysterical. Can you help me come up with something? And she came back, and several months later, it took her a while to sort of figure out exactly how she thought the work or the line should go. And she came back with 2 different versions, and I don't speak Greek, so I couldn't tell you what they were. But one of the versions, she said she chose a word that comes from the Greek word Maenad, which are the followers of Dionysus, who are women who would go off into the hills outside of Athens and have these, the Romans called them bacchanalias because Bacchus, these wild, frenzied, literally crazy parties where they would do things like they'd rip at their hair and they'd scream and they would run wild. Mm-hmm. These women would run wild and they were known as Maenads. And so she found the word that meant to act like a Maenad. Mm. And given the choice between the very female-centric act like a Maenad and some other generic run wild term, I, of course, because we were trying to translate hysterical, which is a distinctly feminine term, I said, you had me at act like a Maenad. That is the one we are going to. So what Myrtle says is, neither will I act like a Maenad, nor will I rave.
I love it.
So not quite, I will not be hysterical and ridiculous, but as close as a Victorian classical scholar could get.
Because that was a punishment in the schools back then, is to write lines of Greek. And they would be assigned, write 400 lines. from
Yes.
something. And because I've read my PG Woodhouse, and that was a staple of his school stories.
And there's a classic, I can't believe I'm bringing this up, but there is a classic Simpsons image of Bart writing
Writing on the
lines in
blackboard.
school, and I can't remember what he writes lines, but that's the one that comes to mind for me as something that's going to resonate with anyone younger than us.
Yeah, exactly. It's whatever he was being punished for at the moment,
Right? Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I also wanted to get into actually. We've been talking now for quite a while, actually, which I appreciate very much.
Oh
Um,
yeah. I will. I could do this for a week
yeah.
and not run out. So I sorry,
Well,
not sorry.
that's exactly. But I wanted to get into some other aspects of your writing life because you do workshops and presentations. You have that on your website. So if you look up Elizabeth C. Bunce online, you'll find that because you do that for groups, for schools. Is that the idea?
I will. Yes, I do everything from young writers to adult writers to school groups to libraries. I am about to present at the St. Louis Writers Guild virtual summer camp, which is such an amazing event. It's young writers from the St. Louis metro area have been spending the last few weeks working on their stories, and we're going to come together and Zoom like this, talking about storytelling, and we get to have a great workshop. And it's always so much fun to see what young writers are obsessed with in a particular era. The last time I did the workshop a couple of years ago, everyone was writing about wolves, which was so interesting to see. And yeah, I did earlier this year. I was invited to come to Helena, Montana on January 30th, which is, I don't know if Montana people understand that most of us don't know about winter
Oh,
that much, even if we grew up in Iowa. But it was fantastic. It was an amazing time. It is, if you're going to see Montana, that is the time, because
yeah.
it was exceptionally Montana while I was there. It was gorgeous, and it snowed a lot.
Hmm. But
But that workshop was amazing because they asked me to come and present a workshop that I do on historical costuming, because
that's exactly what I was going to talk to
I'm
you
a
about.
historical costumer, and I hadn't gotten a chance to do this particular workshop since Myrtle. And so I had to kind of, I started from scratch, and I wrote it almost all afresh, and it was just so much fun.
Yeah, because you identify yourself as a maker, so you make things. Did you make that dress that's on your website, that Elizabethan dress?
Oh yes,
Mhm.
yes, and I made the Bausch armor. The Bausch the bounty hunter from Return of the Jedi. That was a
Yeah,
great
that
cosplay
was
we
you
are.
inside the mask, was
That
it?
was me inside the mask. Yes, that was me. And eventually, there's going to be a Wookiee that comes with it when we have time to latch hook all of the hair onto the mesh for the Wookiee
Mhm.
suit.
Right, right.
But so yeah,
Well, it's a lot of. It must be a lot of fun being able to just say, "I'm going to make something. I'm going to do this," because you had some quilting examples as well. I saw on your website.
yes, yes. So part of it is because as I've been a maker since I was as long as I can remember. My parents would send us off to day camp at the Parks and Rec in Lincoln, Nebraska, when I was like 4 and 5 years old. And I would come back and I'd be like, "Can I have yarn and popsicle sticks? Because I want to make more God's eyes."
Hmm.
And I was always doing something with my hands, and not always, the most talented or the most artistic, but I always wanted to do things that were tangible. And as a writer, I mean, that's where most of my making energy obviously goes into making books. But all of that happens in here or here on the screen. And I spend a lot of creative energy pouring out energy and effort to get nothing back that I can feel.
Yeah.
And
Oh, absolutely.
so I find it really rewarding to make things, costumes, because I'm mainly a needlewoman and a seamstress, that resonate with the stories that I'm telling. And when I started writing, so I've done historical costumes for all of my fantasy novels for the period. So when I did A Curse Dark as Gold, which was set in an 18th century woolen mill, I made an 18th century costume entirely from wool. And not entirely from wool. All of the undergarments were made from the correct linen and cottons and etc. But the outer garments were all wool. When I was writing Curse, which is set in the Renaissance era-ish of fantasy world, I Renaissance costuming sort of my first costuming passion, because we have a really active local Renaissance fair in the Kansas City area, and my husband and I have gone to that for years. And we took our dogs, and the dogs would dress up, and we would dress up, and so there's an entire room full of Renaissance garb here. But when I started writing Myrtle, it was a little bit different, because suddenly my character was 12 and I was not 12. And in many historical eras, the children dressed almost exactly, young people dressed almost exactly like adults. That was not the case for Victorian girls. There was a very distinct Victorian fashion for 12-year-olds, and I was like, okay, so I'm not going to really be doing that. Although I did make myself a cycling costume, because that was something that Myrtle and Miss Judson ride their bicycles to solve crimes, and I wanted to explore that. Sorry, how moody! We're getting a thunderstorm. I wanted to explore that facet of women's history, of that
Mm-hmm.
costuming. And so I did make, and that is the outfit that I wore to give the presentation in Montana. It was really fun. Um, where am I going with this? Oh, and then, so I was thinking I would not be really doing much more with the Victorian fashion. And then my 7-year-old nieces got American Girl dolls for Christmas, and this is getting into a you would not put the two things together. The woman obsessed with forensic science and wanting to spend her whole life with murder, with the thing I'm going to tell you next, which is that when my 7-year-old nieces got American Girl dolls for Christmas, they asked me to sew something for them, which I'd been doing for them since they were babies. And I said, well, what would you, if you design the outfits you want, I will sew them for your dolls. And so that got me started sewing for 18-inch dolls, which I've learned are the size of, or are meant to represent a girl of about 11 or 12 years old, which is perfect Myrtle size. I was like, ooh, I have an outlet here for the historical costuming. And because I was not prepared, stupidly, for this conversation to go in this direction, I do not have one handy that I made, but I have something almost better,
Mm.
which is a piece of fan art. Because the doll costuming situation had got me involved in the doll community. And a member of the doll community was also a Myrtle fan, runs a doll hospital.
Yeah.
Her name is Marshall Macklin, and she made this custom American Girl doll as young Ada Judson.
Oh my goodness.
And so
That's
she's
beautiful.
wearing this extraordinary costume. She has this stunning wig on. And she just popped this in. It's just arrived on my doorstep one day last summer and just absolutely floored me that out there in the universe is another maker who read my words and made something from them. And it just the circle of inspiration is so astonishing to me because I get my inspiration from, historical garments that exist in museums, and I write them into the stories, and then I make things, and then I've made a thing that inspired someone else, and it's just been the most rewarding thought that, when kids come up to me showing me their Myrtle fan fiction that they've written, or I have on, I hope it's still linked on my website, a manga of A Curse Dark as Gold that a young fan wrote and illustrated, and these these are the ineffable moments you cannot plan for
Yeah.
as a writer
You can't design it happening. It just has to happen
that make you think, okay, so all of that slogging, all of that vagaries of the publishing industry, all of the paper costs too much, all of the we had to change your publication date because nobody is shipping books to cities under lockdown during COVID. All of those moments disappear when somebody makes something and somebody pours their own creative energy into making something that was inspired by something that you wrote, created. And I don't even know what to do with the bigness
with
of
the feels
that
of that
experience, except to keep making things and sharing my own passions and joys and enthusiasm for everything that I love with readers of all ages.
And it's very valuable. It's very necessary. And it bonds us together and supports and uplifts each other.
It does. That connection, that mesh, that sense of being, tied together with fellow creators. The fact that, I mean, writing's a weird thing. I have imaginary people that live in my head, and they've had an influence on someone. The Myrtle books have been translated into 5 or 6 languages, and there are kids and adults in countries that I may never be fortunate enough to set foot in who are reading about my characters. I will never ever meet those young readers, and yet they know Myrtle. It's astonishing. And maybe 100 years from now, somebody's going to find a Myrtle book, and
Myrtle will live again.
Myrtle will keep living. So yeah.
So we're about to go wrap this up. It's been an hour already, and boy, it goes by really quick.
It does.
When you're talking about cool things. Are you doing any further writing? Are we going to hear from Myrtle again?
So we will always there will be more Myrtles. I don't have a firm date or even a, what's the opposite of firm? Squishy date?
Tentative.
On that at all. But the next thing, so I'm wrapping up revisions on on another YA fantasy right now. So that's what's happening now. And then the very next thing that's happening is a Myrtle spin-off series for adults. And I say adults in the same way that Myrtle is for kids. I'm not intending to change anything about the way that I tell these stories, except how they get positioned in the marketplace. And that one of the adult characters from one of the recurring characters will be headlining the new series. And I have some interest in that, although I've not yet had time to actually write the book. But it is
always a problem.
We're so close. We're so close. That is absolutely the next project up, and I am I'm so looking forward to returning to this world. Um, the world of YA I love it. I'm passionate about it. The stories are really strong, but they take a lot out of you. They're very, for lack of a better word, they're very emo.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of emotional intensity to writing teen characters that is just not really quite there. Myrtle is a little. I mean, Myrtle has her moments of acting like a Maenad, but they don't take over for me. You know, they don't drain me like being inside a teenager's head for a couple of years. So I'm really looking forward to coming back to that world and to being burying myself back in the research again.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Myrtle fans, and hopefully people who pick up the books in the future based on our interview will appreciate her and look forward to her further adventures.
yes. So yeah,
Yeah.
this has been absolutely delightful. So thank you for having me.
Yes, it was my pleasure. And I'll just go ahead and wrap this up and say thank you very much to Elizabeth C. Bunce for spending some time with us today and sharing your thoughts on Myrtle and the world in general and some amazing things as well. I really appreciate this. And this is Bill Peschel for Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents. And I hope that your favorite book is the one you're reading right now. Thank you and bye. Bye-bye. Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents is sponsored by the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. To learn more about the store, visit the website at www.mysterybooksonline.com. And thank you for listening.